Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. The Kitchen Table series, MTG Burgeoning's longest running content series, returns with its 71st deck tech, and today we're going to roll out with a mono green Landfall build. Thank you for choosing MTG Burgeoning for your Magic the Gathering content. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and consider becoming a subscriber. Doing so supports the channel and makes you eligible for our various subscriber rewards series. If you would like to support the channel further, then click the link to our Patreon page in the description below. There you can join our ongoing Pack Wars series as a 1-month supporter or ongoing member. Or try joining Pack Wars for free by commenting on every MTG Burgeoning video in a month. We strive to offer creative rewards through our various Patreon tiers. So if Pack Wars isn't for you, then something else will be. Links to our content and various subscriber rewards series can be found in the description below. Send us an email, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. We are your channel for all things magic. What's up, MTG BC? You are the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to another episode of the Kitchen Table series. We're up to deck tech number 71, and today we've got a nice, strong, rarely loses mono green Landfall build. So, as generally is customary with the Kitchen Table series, let's start with the mana base. We're going to look at a stack of forests. This is just mono green, so we really don't have a lot of need to try to overfix the mana. We only need green mana, so we're just going to throw 20 forests in. That's going to be the base of our deck. So there's our 20 forests, but we're not quite done with the lands because this is Landfall. We want to make sure that we have lands falling onto our side of the battlefield every which way but Sunday. So we're going to begin with 4 copies of Evolving Wilds. Now I will stop right here and preface this by saying this is just a kitchen table deck. This is not a deck that's looking to overly break the bank in any way. So if you're planning to build or mimic this deck at all, step 1, if they are available, mine currently are not, but if they are available, I would absolutely swap in a playset of Fabled Passages for Evolving Wilds. That's easy enough to say. Fabled Passage is a fantastic fetch spell for basic lands, particularly in a deck that wants them hitting the battlefield early, often, and frequently. With that being said, we're going to tap sacrifice Evolving Wilds. We're going to search for one of those forests and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now, the mana is not going to be as important as what the forest is going to do when it comes into play. So on some turns, we're going to get 2-for-1 abilities as we play the Evolving Wilds, have a Landfall trigger, sacrifice it, put a forest into play, and get that Landfall trigger as well. 4 copies of Evolving Wilds. Next up, we're going to throw 2 copies of Terramorphic Expanse. Again, this goes right back to if you can put Fabled Passages in here instead, that would be absolutely fine. If you can go as far as putting in Prismatic Vistas, that too would absolutely be fine. This is just more of a kitchen table build, but if you want to take it to a couple more levels, all and any of those fetch lands would absolutely be fine. Terramorphic Expanse is just Evolving Wilds 2.0, and now we have 6 lands that are going to be able to help us fetch those forests from our library and put them right onto the battlefield. And finishing off the mana base for this section, of course it's kitchen table, so we're going to throw in our Soul Ring. We have to, it's the kitchen table. All right, so in addition to those 6 quote-unquote fetch lands, we got to find some other ways to get lands onto our side of the battlefield so that we can do landfall things. Let's begin with increasing the number of land drops we have during each one of our turns by playing Azusa, Lost But Seeking, a 1/2 human monk for 2 and a green mana. We can play 2 additional lands on each of our turns. 2 copies of Azusa, just because I don't have 4. All right, next up, and an oft-overlooked card, a common from the original Modern Horizons. that really can help accentuate a landfall build, particularly if you have additional graveyard synergies, which, let's be honest, we're going to get to that point as well. So with an entire playset going in, let's talk about Spring Bloom Druid. It's a 1/1 elf druid for 2 and a green. When it ETBs, we may sacrifice a land, and if we do, we search our library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Now, there are many other elves that can go into play and fetch a forest from our library. Wood elves can do it. Firehaven elf can do it. However, Spring Bloom Druid is the only one that can put 2 of them onto our side of the battlefield. That is much more important, getting the additional landfall triggers so that we can continue to try to overwhelm our side of the board and then out-resource and, defeat our opponents. We do lose one of the lands by having to sacrifice it. We do lose one of our lands because of the sacrifice trigger. But like I said, we're going to take care of that. So 4 copies of Spring Bloom Druid. Its ETB trigger is overly valuable in this build, and it's a good chump blocker as well. As we were talking about graveyard synergies, let's also introduce a full playset of Ramunap Excavator. It's a 2/3 Naga Cleric for 2 and 1 green mana, and this lets us play land cards from our graveyard. That's it. So if we have one of those Evolving Wilds or 1 copy of Terramorphic Expanse in our graveyard, Ramunap Excavator will allow us to play that from our graveyard, triggering our landfall abilities, and then we can sacrifice it again, getting a forest, having it trigger more landfall abilities, and if we have a Zusa on our side of the battlefield as well, we can do that 2 more times. And if we're going to play with a full playset of Ramunap Excavator, we might as well play with its original inspiration, 1 copy of Crucible of Worlds. It does the exact same thing as Ramunap Excavator, except it's an artifact for 3 generic mana and no body. It's just a straight artifact, which will be a lot more difficult for our opponents to get rid of from the battlefield. All right, 6 more sources of getting our lands onto our side of the battlefield, and they're all enchantments. Next up, we'll play with 2 copies of our channel's namesake. It is Burgeoning. 1 green mana. Whenever an opponent plays a land, we may put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. Now, just to tap the brakes here a little bit, this is not one of those automatic triggers that whenever a land enters our opponent's side of the battlefield, we can put a land into play. No. They have to play the land for their land for turn, and then we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. Just so that's straightened up, that's still enough of a benefit to include 2 copies here for the purposes of activating our landfall abilities as frequently as possible. And lastly, we have a full playset of Call Me Heart Expedition. 1 and a green with the landfall mechanic. Whenever a land ETBs under our control, we may put a quest counter on Call Me Heart Expedition. We can remove 3 of these quest counters from it and sacrifice it. Then we can search our library for 2 basic lands, in this case it'll be 2 forests, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. With these enchantments online, we can just sit back and wait for the prime moment to remove those quest counters, because we can do so at instant speed at any time during the game. So we can just sit back and wait for one of our massive landfall payoffs to be on our side of the battlefield, sacrifice Call Me Heart Expedition for a couple of the forests, and start counting out all of those different landfall triggers. All right, so we have our land base, we have our soul ring, we have ways to get those lands onto our side of the battlefield in numerous ways from our hand, from our library, and even from our graveyard. Now we have to find some ways to use all of these lands when they're on the battlefield and as they're entering. That's what the rest of this video will be dedicated to. So the first playset of cards we're going to talk about is Primal Bellow. It's an instant for 1 green, and target creature will get +1/+1 until end of turn for each forest we control. Since the mana base is flooded with forests, the land base is flooded with forests, a 1 mana massive pump spell is enough to completely one-shot an opponent, particularly if we're really getting all of our synergies with our fetch lands and our graveyard shenanigans as well. All right, next up, we're going to play with 2 copies of Blackblade Reforged. It's a legendary artifact, so don't play with 2 of them as long as your playgroup observes the legend rule. It's 2 to cast, it's 7 to equip, but it's 3 to equip to a legendary creature. And yes, we will have some legendary creatures in this build. You've already seen a couple with Azusa, Lost But Seeking. So this is going to give equip creature +1/+1 for each land we control. With the ability to one-shot once we see some of the creatures this can attach onto, you're going to see why we have the Blackblade Reforge, and it's going to make a lot more sense why we also have Primal Bellow. Alright, we are down to our last 10 cards, and they are all creatures with some massive landfall and land synergies. The first one has a mana value of 6. It's a full playset of Rampaging Baloths. It's a 6/6 trampler for 4 and 2 green mana. Whenever a land ETB is under our control, we're going to create a 4/4 green beast creature token. And can you imagine if we amass enough of an army that we turn all of those beasts sideways and our opponents don't have enough creatures to chump block with? Well, then we can pick out one of the unblocked creatures, cast a very timely Primal Bellow, and then end up winning the game because we have more forests on the battlefield than anyone else. 4 copies of Rampaging Baloths. Our next playset is the card that we want to make sure that we target with Primal Bellow. It's the card that we want to make sure we equip Blackblade Reforged to because it is also a legendary creature. 4 copies, 4 and 2 green mana. It is Multani Yavamaya's Avatar. It has reach, it has trample, it gets +1/+1 for each land we control, and for each land card in our graveyard. It also has a recursive ability. We pay 1 and a green, we return 2 lands we control to our hand, and then we can return Multani from our graveyard to our hand. It is a legendary creature, of course, so only have 1 of them in play at a time, but just the fact that it can recur itself from the graveyard and bounce 2 lands from our side of the battlefield back to our hand, that we can also play again to get more and more landfall triggers. Multani is our finisher. This is what we built the deck around. This is what we want on our side of the battlefield, and outside of exiling, Multani will never go away. 4 copies of Multani, the Yavamaya finisher. And we're left with 2 more cards, and you knew it was only a matter of time until we brought out the original. It's AOZ. It's Avenger of Zendikar. 5/5 elemental for 5 and 2 green mana. When it ETBs, we'll create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land we control. And whenever a land ETBs under our control, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature we control. So if we've got those Calming Heart expeditions just sitting there waiting, let's cast the Avenger, make at least a minimum of 7 plant creature tokens if we used all of our mana from lands to cast it, and then let's sacrifice those Calling Heart expeditions, and let's start doling out +1/+1 counters like candy from a Pez dispenser. 2 copies of Avenger of Zendikar. And there you have it, MTG BC. This is deck tech number 71. We got mono green Landfall. Let me know your thoughts about this deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.